Today I'm going to show you how to create this procedural sea urchin shell. This is going to be using a UV sphere, and it's not going to involve any modeling. All of this is going to be done by displacement and texturing. This is what the nodes are going to look like. It's going to be fairly complicated. This is something I was working on for probably a couple months on and off. Also, a quick thanks to my patrons. Really appreciate the support. If you want to become a patron, you get access to all my blend files from my tutorials and some additional scenes that I've put together. To start off, I'm going to get rid of this cube and bring in a UV sphere. I'm going to go over to the world properties, and next to color there's this yellow circle. I'm going to select environment texture. I want to bring in some HDRI lighting. So go to open and navigate to where you got some HDRIs. I've got some free ones that I downloaded from hdrihaven.com. It's very useful. I'm going to use Cloud Layers 1K. I'm also going to switch over to the Cycles render engine. So render properties, just select Cycles. And I'm going to use the experimental feature set as well for adaptive subdivision. And if you have access to a GPU, go ahead and select that. It'll be a little faster. If you hold down Z and move your mouse up, you'll be in rendered mode. We can see the HDRI in the background. I'm actually just going to turn it off from the background, so it's still lighting our object, but we won't be able to see it. So if you go to World Properties, then down to Ray Visibility, just unclick this box that says Camera. It's up to you whether you want to leave this light in or not. I'm going to get rid of it. I'll just use the HDRI lighting. And let's click on our object there and go down to this material properties here. And we're going to put that material that was on our cube originally. We'll just put it on this here. Might as well. It's already there. And go down to settings. And this is going to enable displacement. If we go to where it says displacement, just change it from bump only to either displacement only or displacement and bump. I'll do displacement and bump. The last thing I want to do is just put a modifier on here. So in the modifiers panel, go to subdivision surface modifier, and there should be this checkbox that says adaptive subdivision. If it's not there, you probably didn't enable the experimental feature set. So just click that, and it'll adaptively subdivide our object, which basically means the closer it is to the camera, the more subdivisions it gets. And we can also shade smooth. So just bring up this context menu with W or right click and shade smooth. I'm going to change the whole middle area to my shader editor. Just so I have more room to work here. Hit N to get rid of that shelf on the right. And I'm going to change this top right area to my 3D viewport. Just make it a little larger. And yeah, move your mouse up so it's in rendered mode so you can see the transformations take place here. After spending a while looking at sea urchin shells, I noticed that this 5-point symmetry kept on coming up. You know, like here it is here it is here, in different ways, different colors, you know, but it always seems to be 5 points, so seems important. I should probably take that into account when designing this thing. Let's start with that 5-point symmetry there. I'm going to hit Shift A, go to Search, and start typing in coordinate, and I can find a texture coordinate node super quick. I'm going to hold down Control, Shift, and left click to get a preview going, and I'm going to go down to Object. Just a quick note before I set this up. In my final setup, I'm using Object, UV, and generated outputs just to create different patterns. It wasn't ideal. It was just I couldn't figure out a way to create one pattern without using a UV output. And that pattern didn't really work for the other ones as well. So you'll see that in a bit. It's not ideal. It's just kind of what I've set up so far because I couldn't figure out how to do it any other way. I'm going to hit Shift and right click and drag through this to make a node reroute. I'm just going to do 2 of them. Bring it up here. And I'm going to bring in a gradient node. Place it right here. And let's set this to Radial. If we look at this from the top, we can kind of see what's happening. This is our 0 value here where it's black. And then as it goes around the object in a radial pattern, it travels all the way to 1, where white is at the end there. By the way, to get this preview here is just Control Shift and left click on a node. It's a node wrangler shortcut, so you just need to have it enabled for that to work. I'm going to add a few math nodes here to manipulate these values. So just search for math node and drop that on there. I'm going to change this to multiply and change this to 10. And now instead of going from 0 to 1, it's going from 0 to 10. I'm going to click on this multiply and hit Shift D and select ping pong. And I'm going to set this to 1. That'll create 5 sections, and it's dependent upon this number here and this number here. Basically, we're saying go from 0 to 1 however many times you can with the values that are supplied here. So here we have 0 with the black, 1 is right here with white, 0 is black, 1, 0, 1. And because each section is 0 to 1 and then 1 to 0, that's kind of like 2 right there. So that's 5 sections of 2, adds up to 10. If you wanted twice as many sections, just set that to 20. I'm going to add one more node right before that multiply and change this to subtract. And I'm going to change this to 0.25. You see if we adjust this, it just rotates our pattern a little bit. That'll be helpful in a bit, but I figured I would just do it now while we're working on this section. I'm going to feed this into a color ramp, and I'm just going to set this to constant. And drag this back here. Actually, instead of dragging it back, I'm just going to make a couple more dots here. Let's go with 5 flags in total. These are all going to be shades of gray, so this first one is going to be black. This second one, let's set this at 0.161, and I'm just going to open this up and set the value to 0.05. So if we scroll it a little bit, we can see where it is. It's just right there on the value scale. This third flag, let's set this at 0.376, and I'm just going to set the value at 0.6. So quite a bit lighter there. This fourth flag, let's set this at 0.578, and I'm going to set the value of this one at 0.26. So it's actually darker than this one here. And this last value, we'll leave it on white. We're going to set this position at 0.882. Let's leave this color ramp for a second. We'll come back to that. I'm going to come out of UV for another branch here, and we're going to use a Voronoi node. Just place that right here. Let's come out of distance. I'm going to set the scale to 40 and the randomness to 0.2. And this is the reason why I actually used a UV sphere. Let's check that out actually. So let's go to the UV editor. And if we go into edit mode, we can see the UV map here. Basically, it's all quads, even though they're not quads on our model. So things get stretched as they go to the poles, which is kind of what already happens on a sea urchin shell. So this just kind of gave us an advantage. I'm going to put a color ramp right after this Voronoi because instead of the black circles, I like white circles instead. So I'm going to bring the white to the bottom, and let's move this black quite far down as well. We'll just leave it at 0.22. So now we have various sizes of these white circles all over our mesh. Let's try putting this into a displacement node. So I'll just search for displacement, place it here, and make sure this is going into height. And then let's run this into displacement here. So you can see it is a little too strong. Let's just put a math node for now. I'll just place it here, change it to multiply, and I'll just change this to 0.1. It's a little closer to what we want, just tiny little spikes there. If you look at the top, you can see they're kind of bunched around, and I kind of like them to be a little shorter up there. You can see as well, if I look at my principal BSDF view, it looks like some weird error is happening there. So let's address that. And I'm going to do that by coming out of object. And maybe let's go from this reroute point here. Let's grab another reroute and move it down here. And then I'm going to search for a separate XYZ node. I'm going to make a circle like I did in my very first tutorial. So I'm just going to bring in a math node, set this to power by opening that up and hitting P, and then setting the exponent to 2. I'm going to duplicate this and run Y into the bottom. I want to duplicate this again, put it after there, and just open this up and hit add. And then I can connect this bottom one here, and it'll just make a circle on the top and bottom of my mesh. I'm going to use this to do a couple of different things, but one of the things I'm going to use it for is to control the height of those little bumps there. So, if we multiply this by a smaller number, those bumps get smaller, and if we multiply it by a bigger number, they get larger. So I'm going to multiply it by this value map here. So basically, as we get to the poles, same kind of thing as the UV map almost, it gets smaller. And let's check out what that did to our overall shape there. It's a lot better here. Now, as we get close to the poles, these things get much smaller, and they're their biggest on that kind of equator line there. I'm also going to use this value map to kind of squish our mesh a little bit. And to do that, I'm just going to bring in a math node set to add. And I'm going to place it after this multiply here. And we're just going to run this into add there. So basically, it kind of squishes it out and pushes in these poles a little bit. And let's add a controller for that as well. I'm just going to duplicate this multiply. And that was, put that on the wrong one. So let's put it here. And maybe I'll just get rid of this, or move that viewer down so it's not as confusing. And so this is, our amount of squish that we're applying to this. If we put this to 1, it'll push those poles down. If we can go quite high if we want. I'm going to leave it at 0.5 for now, and let's just move this down here. I'd also like to shift everything up a little bit, kind of on the Z direction there. So to do that, I'm actually going to come out of generated. I guess I just passed it. So there we go. Going to make a reroute here. Let's put it there, and then bring this down here. And I'm going to do this just a very simple way. I'm going to bring in a separate XYZ node, and then I'll bring in a color ramp. And we just want to run Z into that factor there. We can see basically it's a map just from black at the very bottom of our mesh to white at the very top. And I'm just going to make another add, place it here, and then run this right into the bottom there. On this color ramp, I'm going to leave black at the bottom, but I'm going to bring white down to 0.55. That's one way we can control it. We could also control it by, putting some math nodes after there. I'm fine with this. However you want to set it up, though, is fine. I'm going to bring my principled BSDF over here as well, because I want to start using this to kind of see what we're doing. To connect that. So just move that off, and let's view that there. We can see this weird line, this harsh line here. It's because of the interpolation of this color ramp. I almost forgot to change it. So let's put that at ease, and this will be much rounder, more natural looking. I'm going to bring in a transparent shader, and I'll just place it above the principled BSDF. And then I'm going to hold down Control Shift, right click and drag, and that'll create this mixed shader right here. Then I'm going to use this output back here, where we made that little circle. Let's grab that, and I'm going to grab a color ramp, place it right here, and this is going to go into the factor on that mixed shader. And let's take a look. Now let's bring these flags together and just see what happens. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Let's just put this black to maybe 0.7 or 0.073, and then the white at 0.074. You could also set it to constant if you want. I've just got a very slight gradient there, I guess, and you could make it bigger if you want as well, just by dragging both flags to the right. But this is our hole on the top and bottom of our sea urchin. Usually the bottom hole is bigger. I'm not going to worry about that detail. You could kind of manipulate it using these values here if you want. Make this white and black on the top, or not black, but like, gray or something. So you have a bigger hole down here. That would probably work fine. Let's go back to this color ramp that I almost forgot about, this 5-point radial one here, because I'm actually going to do something with this here that affects that Voronoi as well. I'm going to plug it into this scale, and that's not all I'm going to do. That alone doesn't look too good, but let's just make some reroute points here first, and then I'm going to bring in a math node and place it here, and just duplicate it, place it right after as well. This first one is going to be add, so we'll leave that alone, but the second one is going to be multiply. And this first one I'm going to set to 10. Second one I'm going to set to 5. So let's see what that's doing. Basically, depending on which value I have here, whether it's black or whatever, this black is just going to be 0, so it's going to show up as 0 for that scale. But basically, the higher the number, the smaller those dots are going to be, and 0 is just going to be nothing. So, yeah, it gives us an interesting pattern that depends on that 5-point radial pattern. I'm going to go up to this gradient node here, the radial one, and just duplicate it, because we're going to do one more thing too, where we just kind of push in sections, just kind of periodically around this thing. You could either do it in 10 sections or 5 sections. I'm going to choose to do it in 10. So coming out of this gradient here, I'm just going to bring in a multiply and a ping pong again, but I'm going to change this to 20 instead, so we have 10 sections there. Then I'm going to run this into an add node here, and let's just kind of connect this. I'll just do it further up the chain here, so we'll just do something like this here. So I'll plug that in there and plug that in there. So there we go. It's perfect. Alrighty, we don't really need to adjust it. Obviously, that's not true. Let's bring in a multiply here, and I'm just going to put this to 0.1. And it looks pretty good. It looks like we're still getting kind of linear interpolation there. So we have a couple options. We could put a color ramp there and do the ease like we did before, but why don't we just try an RGB curves node just to try something slightly different here. And I'm going to make one point, and I'm going to put it somewhere around here. My actual point was at 0.18 for the X and 0.83 for the Y. But you can put it wherever you feel like it looks best. Just going to make this into a curve shape here, roughly following the shape that you put in here. So if we look at our mixed shader output there, we can see that at the top there's a little issue there because we don't want so much displacement coming from this RGB curves at the top area there. I'm just going to move this around a little bit so we can kind of see what we're plugging into a bit better. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did down here, where I kind of influence this displacement with this pattern here. It's kind of handy because as we get near the poles, the values decrease. So we should get some pattern that kind of helps us out there. I'm going to duplicate that multiply, place it there, and then run this right into that bottom there. We don't even really have to do any adjustments. It kind of takes it all into account for us there, but if you did want to adjust it, you could. I'm going to introduce one more random element for the size of these little spikes here, and that's going to come from this gradient here. I'm going to feed that into a map range node. And I'm going to set this to stepped linear, and just change the steps to 40. I'm going to move all this up to just give myself a bit more room, not hit H. That's not what I meant to do. So yeah, just move that up there. And then I'm going to feed this into a white noise node. And we can see, it gives us a different value for each section there. You couldn't even really see all the sections here because they're so high. After about 1, they start to all look the same. But we can get black and white value or different color values from this guy. I'm going to rearrange a few things here. I'm going to move these two multiply nodes up a little bit, and I'm going to bring in one more multiply node. I'm going to place it right here, and this part that's coming down from the circle here, I'm actually going to plug this, instead of into this node here, I'm going to plug it into this one here. And that's going to multiply with the value output of this white noise texture that we set up. And if we look at that, it's the same pattern as we had there, just combined with that circle on the top and bottom. And I'm going to feed this into the bottom here, and this is going to go in there. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I guess I did it in kind of a weird order, but let's look at our output here. Basically, we have these little divots sticking out less near the poles, and they're smaller near the poles as well. And we can influence how much they stick out with this multiply right here. Let's put that up to 0.2 actually. I think I like the look of that better. I'm going to grab this Voronoi and color ramp here, and actually this add and multiply too, and I'm just going to duplicate all of those guys. That UV, maybe we can just make that a little cleaner just by going like that. Yeah, that looks a bit better. And I'm going to duplicate this color ramp up here as well. And let's just make some similar reroute points here so we can see where this is going. And I'm going to plug this into that bottom add there. Get rid of that other one. This bottom Voronoi setup that I just made here, there's going to be a second set of points, but I'm going to make these a little smaller. I'm going to set this multiply to 10. So now we can see, they're quite a bit smaller. Let's make sure they are not in the same spot as these bigger points as well. So to do that, I'm going to use this output, feed that into a color ramp. Black is going to be on the bottom, and white is going to be 0.028. So it's basically just black and white. And then I'm going to bring in a mix RGB, place it right here. This is going to go into the factor, and this color ramp that we just created with those small points is going to go into color 1. And then I'm going to set color 2 as black. I'm going to feed this into the chain of displacement there. I'm just going to put an add right there, and I'll just put this into the bottom there. So we can see that it's sticking out too much, so I'm just going to place a multiply right here, and maybe I'll set it to 0.1. 0.1 or 0.2 is probably going to be fine. I take that back. I just rendered it out, and it doesn't look very good without that influence from this circle, I think. So let's just duplicate this, and then I will feed that circle influence into the bottom there. See what that looks like. I'm just going to render this out. Yeah, it looks much better. In fact, those bigger ones might even be a little bit too big still. So maybe just change this from 0.2 to 0.1. Yeah, that looks a bit better. You can see it's going to take like over 10 minutes. That's because these samples on Blender is set really high as a default now. I noticed that. Like max samples, you can actually turn this way down. I guess the render is what I want, so I could do like 256 or even less, maybe 128. Let's render that out. It's much more reasonable, and it looks almost the same. Here it's going to take a little bit less than a minute, probably about half a minute for me. I could turn it down if I wanted to. It's not really even necessary to be that high. Make a few adjustments to this color ramp here that's affecting those little tiny areas that they're pushing out. I should really learn the terminology there instead of just saying that all the time, but whatever. So black is at 0. White is going to be at 0.882. We're going to leave those where they are, but I'm going to change the other three values. This one here, I'm going to put at 0.08, and I'm going to change the value to 0.263. This next one I'm going to put at 0.507, and the value here is going to be 0.051. And this next one, we're going to put this at 0.606, and the value is going to be 0.1. If you zoom in, you can see some spots where those dots are cut off. Let's look at what this is doing, actually. I don't really think I ever really explained that. So let's look at these outputs here, like the big ones there. And if we go up here, it's going to be this top color ramp. We move back and forth, and it basically changes where these are cut off here. If we wanted, we could just make this all one color and be all seamless, but this is just a way to get a more interesting pattern. So basically what I was doing is I was moving these back and forth until I got something I liked the look of. You can change the value, and you can change the position of these flags. Basically, I was trying to get as few of these cuts as possible by moving this back and forth. It was hard to get rid of them all, but just most of them gone really made a huge difference. Even still, some of these don't look too bad when they're displaced out, and you can't really notice them unless you're really looking closely. So the only thing left to do is work on the color. We could just go like this and call it done if we wanted, but that doesn't look that great. So I'm going to use another method, and basically we're going to use the output from this ping pong, and I'm going to feed this into a color ramp. Just place it up here, and why don't we make a reroute there? Just drag it over here. This is where we're going to make our color selection, and I'm going to change this to constant. And you can choose whatever colors you want here, really. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to choose 5 points here, and we'll just move these around and change the colors all at the same time. Start with this bottom flag. It doesn't really matter the position here, as long as it's lower than that first one. So I'm just going to leave it at 0, and we're going to change the value here with the hex code. And so let's select that. There's going to be BFADBA, which is kind of a very light kind of pink color there. Purple pink, I guess. So the second one here will go at 0.223, and this one is going to be C5, C6, C5. It's basically a gray color. I probably meant to make it gray, but it wasn't perfect. That was probably a mistake, but it worked. I was fine with it. So this next one, we're going to go 0.464, and the value there is going to be C4ADC6. It's another purple pink color there. And this fourth flag, we're going to put 0.662, and this hex code is going to be A696A6. Just slightly lighter there. And this last one, we're going to put this at 0.827, and I'm going to change this color to CCB3BA. So just play around with this. A lot of creativity can happen in here. And by the way, this is why I did the offset here, because basically the pattern was not in the right place when I took into account that displacement that was created here. So I just kind of shifted it over by 0.25 with the subtract, and that worked. So these lines are kind of straight. I'm going to make them not so straight with a noise texture. Just going to come out of this top here, which is essentially just coming out of this object output of the texture coordinate node. And I'll bring in a noise texture, and I'll just set the scale to 20, and we'll come out of the factor. I'm going to bring this into a mix RGB. It's going to go into color 1, and this is going to go into color 2. Then I'll feed that into the factor here. Then I'm going to set this at 0.8. So we have mostly this pattern here and a little bit of that noise. I'm going to feed this color ramp into the color on our principled BSDF, see what it looks like. It's already looking much better. And one thing I want to do is make the points where they're pushing out. I want to make that white. I don't want it to be the color there. So I'm going to use this right here, which is the color ramp coming out with those big dots there. And let's just put that here. And I'm going to bring in an add node. And we're going to add this multiply right here, the 0.1, because that is those other dots there. So let's feed that into the bottom here. So basically that plus that is going to give us this map here. And let's use a mix RGB. We'll place that here. Feed this into the factor. This is going to go into color 1. And we'll just make color 2 white. And then we'll feed this into the base color. Make that a bit more obvious, I'm going to bring in a color ramp, just mask that out a bit better, and I'll just drag the white down. We'll put it at 0.027. The last thing I'm going to do is just create something for our roughness, and I'm just going to come out of this color ramp here and feed it into another color ramp, and I'm going to swap these because I want most of the shell to be kind of rough, and then these spots here are going to be a little smoother. So I'm going to leave the white at 0, and I'm going to bring the black down to 0.295, but I'm just going to change the value here. So go to HSV, and we're going to go to 0.52 for the value. Whoops, I think I changed it at the end there. Yeah, 0.52 for the value. And then this is going to go into our roughness on the principled BSDF there. So this is what it looks like rendered out. I might decrease the strength of the big and small areas there, just so it's not quite as exaggerated. And that's going to be these two numbers here. So maybe 0.05 for both of these. Let's try that out. Yeah, that's looking a little bit better. I like the look of this. Now that I've built everything, I probably should label it. In fact, I should have done that. I was going along. So sorry if that was confusing to follow. But this bottom one here, this is going to be kind of the lopsided shape. If that makes sense. It's basically what makes it, kind of this shape here, so it's not kind of completely equal. And if we wanted to influence that more, we could put a math node here and just change this to multiply. And then go like this. Ooh, way too much. But you can see what it's doing anyways. It's creating more of a dome shape there. So I'm just going to grab that off there. Won't worry about that. And then this other one here, this is going to be our circle shape. So it does a lot of things. I think circle shape is probably a good name for it because, it makes those holes, but it also controls the influence of a number of things to make it less drastic near the poles there. This is the small spikes. And let's just move some of this down to give a bit more room. And this is the large spikes right here. Control J is that shortcut. I don't know if I mentioned that. It's just how to make those frames. And then F2 to rename them really quickly there. This is the 5-point radial pattern here. Let's call it 5-point symmetry. And this is the 10-point symmetry. And this is kind of like that random value of that 10-point symmetry. So I'll just call this 10-point symmetry. I guess I didn't capitalize that one, but I capitalized that one. This will be consistent. And then this top one is just a little bit of noise. I don't know if we really need to label that. It's only one node. Kind of makes sense what it's doing. Let's also label this as our color. And this here, that's kind of the color of those tips there. I don't think we should bother changing that. So we'll just kind of leave it in that mix RGB. We could create another RGB node to feed into there if we wanted to try and frame that, but whatever. It's going to be our roughness, so let's just make that more apparent. And this right here is the hole size. You can also change the colors of these frames by selecting them, hitting N to bring up the shelf, and just selecting color there. Then you can choose a random color. And one more actually, this hole size. There we go. A little easier to see what's going on now. I'm going to change one or two things here. For that larger dot displacement here, I'm going to turn that up to 0.08 so it sticks out a little further. And then I'm going to change these colors just so they're a little more similar to each other. There, I like the look of this a little bit better. One last thing I'm going to do is just move this over a little bit. And I'm going to make some noise influence for this Voronoi as well. I kind of forgot to do that. Put this noise here, bring in a mix RGB, and I'm just going to make a reroute there and plug it into the bottom there. This noise texture is going to be set at 40, and then this mix RGB is going to be set at 0.999. So we basically get almost no noise through there. You know, if we set this at 0.99, it'd be much more noticeable. 0.999 is where I like the look of it. It doesn't do too much. It's very subtle, but it adds a little. So I'm just looking at this guy here, and one thing that still kind of bugs me is just the hole at the top. Kind of looks like a black void. You can't really see anything inside. If we go inside, you can see it's pretty dark in here. Really only just getting a little bit of light coming from that hole there. So maybe I should make it a little bit translucent. And to do that, I'm going to move this mix shader over a little bit, place another mix shader right here. So I just duplicated it with Shift-D. And I'm going to grab a translucent shader, place it here, and I'm going to run this color output that we have going into the printable BSDF into that color input on the translucent there. And let's plug that into this shader here. So if you look at this output, it's a little bit too much translucency. I don't want it quite this strong. I'm going to turn it down with this mix shader here, put it to 0.2, then we have mostly this principled BSDF coming through here. All right, that's it for today. Hope it was easy to follow, and hope you could see what I was doing and how you might change it around. If you do have any questions, just let me know. I'll see what I can do to clear up any confusion you have. Thanks for watching.